Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining. Thank you for joining the BERDO Review Board meeting today. We do not have an appointed chair just yet, so I will be leading us in a vote to appoint an acting chair. Is there a motion to appoint someone as acting chair?
I make a motion that we appoint Lee Matsueda as acting chair.
Thank you. Is there a second?
Second.
Thank you. I will now go down the line to vote. Board Member Boyd, how do you vote?
In favor.
Board Member Jacobs?
In favor.
Board Member Lattimore?
In favor.
Board Member Matsueda?
In favor.
Board Member Palmer Dunning?
In favor.
And Board Member O'Malley?
In favor.
Awesome. In that case, I will now hand it over to Acting Chair Matsueda.
All right, then. Good afternoon, everybody. I am calling this public hearing to order at 4:37 p.m. In accordance with the Building Emissions Reduction and Disclosure Ordinance regulations adopted pursuant to the Building Emissions Reduction and Disclosure Ordinance, Boston City Code Ordinances Section 7-2.2. The BERDO Review Board will hold a virtual public hearing 4:30 p.m. on July 24th to review the following topics in regards to the reduction of greenhouse gases from building energy production and consumption so as to promote the public health and welfare of Boston residents. In accordance with the Commonwealth of Massachusetts Executive Order suspending certain provisions of the open meeting law, we are conducting this public meeting online. And to ensure access to deliberations of the BERDO Review Board, the public may access this call through telephone and video conferencing. Members of the public will have the opportunity to ask questions and provide public comment on regulation discussions. To do so, you'll be able to raise your hand or type in the chat in the application via the Zoom meeting platform. And if you're calling in and you can't use that platform, you can raise your hand by pressing *9. You can also send your questions to staff via email at brb@boston.gov. So for the record, I am Lee Matsueda, acting chair of the board. I'll now conduct a roll call of board members. So board members, just please say your name in the order that they appear on the slide.
Rashida Boyd. Lavette Jacobs. Gail Lattimore.
Lee Matsueda.
Matt O'Malley.
Kai Palmer Dunning.
Great. And now we will have our staff introduce themselves.
Diana Vasquez, Environment Department.
Hi everyone, Claudia Diaz Martinez, Environment Department.
Aladin Joroff, Environment Department.
Aiden Callan, Environment Department.
Excellent. All right, so for our first agenda item, we're just going to approve our previous meeting minutes. I hope folks have had a chance to take a look at it. I think our last meeting was on July 10th. Is there a motion to approve our minutes?
So moved.
Second.
Great. On to the motion. We're just going to ask all board members to, how do you vote? So Board Member Boyd?
In favor.
Thank you. Board Member Jacobs?
In favor.
Board Member Lattimore?
In the affirmative.
I'm also in favor. Board Member O'Malley?
Aye.
And Board Member Palmer Dunning?
In favor.
Great. So our second agenda is an update and discussion on BERDO Phase 3 regulations development. The BERDO team has presented draft regulations on building portfolios and individual compliance schedules to the Air Pollution Control Commission on July 19th. They're now going to present those regulations to us in addition to general updates. And we're going to present in two or in draft regulations in two sections. First, focused on building portfolios. We'll have an opportunity for board questions and answers, and then a second section on individual compliance schedules. So we got a lot to do here, a lot of slides. I appreciate the work the staff has done here. I am going to encourage both members of the board and the public. If you got questions, just you might want to have a pen and paper in hand or something like that, because there's a lot to get to here in between the question and answers. So I think with that, I am going to pass it over to our environment department staff.
Yeah, and just before we start, I see Counselor Lara has joined. I want to invite her to state her name for the record if she'd like.
Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Counselor Kendra Lara. Really excited to be here with you all today.
Awesome, thank you. And I can kick us off with phase 3 updates. So just a quick review and reminder what phase 3 regulation topics we're hoping to address during this phase. So where you want to make regulations around building portfolios, individual compliance schedules, hardship compliance plans, the Equitable Emissions Investment Fund, fines and enforcement, and just compliance with the emission standards. So a review of some of the activities and progress we have conducted so far. Launch 3, this might be familiar for some folks. We launched phase 3 with a listening session in March, and you can find those slides and notes online at boston.gov/BERDO regulations. We've had 2 technical working sessions focused on building portfolios and individual compliance schedules in March and April. Those notes are also available online. And we've had 7 community advisory group meetings. And our next sort of meeting is an optional office hour situation on July 26th. And our next official meeting is August 8th. We've also had focus groups regarding hardship compliance with the following stakeholders. So affordable housing, Longwood hospitals, healthcare, historic preservation, and the Green Ribbon Commission's Cultural Institutions Working Group, all within the June and July months. And we've selected in our meeting with a technical consultant to support the development of regulations regarding technical hardship compliance plans and what that will kind of look like. We've started discussions about hardship compliance plans with our community advisory group. And of course, throughout the summer, we are planning additional community meetings, technical working sessions, and other focus groups as they come up. And then most recently, just last week, we presented these regulations to the Air Pollution Control Commission, which is the body that votes on these regulations. And they voted to open a 21-day formal comment period. The comment period officially opened this past Friday on July 21st and closes this Friday, August 11th at 12 p.m. And so this is what we're presenting today, the same regulations, and hopefully it should give folks an idea of what we're envisioning, and if they want to commit to participate in the public comment period, they're welcome to. And just a really super quick review of what we mean when I say building portfolios and individual compliance schedules. So building portfolios, it allows an owner of multiple buildings to comply with a single portfolio level emissions standard that's based on a mix of building uses in the portfolio. An individual compliance schedule is an alternative emissions reduction timeline that allows an owner to decrease their emissions based on a baseline year that's different than the default that's written in the ordinance. And they still would have to be 0 by 2050, but it's like a individualized timeline for them. Great, and I think I will pass it off to Claudia now.
Hi, everyone. I will present the draft language that the BERDO team presented to the Air Pollution Control Commission last Wednesday. At that hearing, we provided a very detailed, almost line-by-line reading of that draft language. So today I'm gonna walk you through that draft language, but highlighting the main changes from the regulations proposals, as well as the regulations and policies that more directly impact the review board. And the slides for that Air Pollution Control Commission hearing are already available on the BERDO regulations website for your reference, as well as the draft regulations. Maybe Diana can help me to put that link on the chat. But for now, next slide, please. Perfect. So the review board members might remember that some of the comments that we received during the informal public comment period were related to really defining the terms deed restricted, affordable housing, and sponsor. So we added draft language clarifying those definitions, both for deed restricted residential buildings and sponsors, which essentially are the entities that have material control over those deed restricted residential buildings. So I won't read through the definitions today, but just so you know that we define them when I'm referring to these terms today. Next slide, please. So the first set of draft regulations are related to the eligibility criteria for building portfolios. So who would be able to receive this flexibility mechanism? So there are different scenarios in which building owners could prove that they are the same owner of buildings. Gail, do you have a question before I continue?
Yes, thank you.
Yes.
I was reviewing the comments received from the various parties and as relates to ownership. There was a comment from Mass General Brigham about, their buildings are under what they call common corporate control of Mass General Brigham. I was just trying to make sure I understood what the difference was because I didn't see it. Maybe I need to read more thoroughly and further. But in the comments document, I didn't see, or in the regs, I didn't see kind of clarification about how ownership differs from common control, or is that spoken to in the sponsor language? I'm just trying to make sure I understand what common corporate control means in the instance that Mass General Brigham mentioned it in their comments.
Yeah, this is Aladdin. I'll jump in. We have tried to address that in the definition of owner for building portfolio purposes, focusing on common control and charitable corporations, as well as kind of special entities that are non-charitable. We are going to make sure that we get feedback from hospitals and other building owners to make sure that does capture their point. There's a distinction between, private companies that manage buildings would not qualify as an owner for this purpose. So we just need to make sure we get the language right. But the intent is to cover them, to have the language cover what they need it to cover.
Yeah, thank you. I
Yeah.
assumed that it was in that, but it just was trying to make sure I understood what they meant by common control versus ownership. Yeah, thank you. I think it's worth clarifying.
Yeah, thank you.
And I will highlight when I'm going through these draft language spaces where we're directly replying to certain comments or addressing comments, but we'll also have a Q&A section after building portfolios in ICS to go into more details when needed. So just to clarify who would be eligible to apply for building portfolios, basically the owners would need to provide evidence and attest to any of the following cases. First, that all buildings have the same owner as listed in the records of the Boston Assessing Department, or all buildings are deed restricted residential buildings and have the same sponsor. This is directly that definition that I mentioned before. Or all buildings have the same majority owner of two or more special purpose entities or charitable corporations, each owning a single building. Here we are trying to address that concern that Gail mentioned on whether hospitals are able to apply for building portfolios, but we're welcome on feedback if this language is still not getting to that point. And finally, all buildings are part of one approved institutional master plan. And we clarified that buildings that are part of different institutional master plans can still be part of one single portfolio as long as the building owners demonstrate that those buildings share the same owner with any of those cases that I mentioned before. Next slide, please. So the rest of the eligibility criteria remain basically the same from the regulations proposals, but there's two additions. First, to clarify that for any building portfolio that combines buildings with emission standard requirements and starting in 2025 and 2030, the owner shall meet the applicable 2025 to 2029 emission standard in Table 1 for the whole building portfolio until 2030. And also to clarify that any building in the proposed building portfolio that is required to meet a net zero emission standard prior to 2050 must meet its building specific emission standard every compliance year. And this responds directly to a comment regarding whether buildings that would be subject to net zero standards could be part of portfolios. We clarify they can be part of portfolios, but they would still need to meet their building specific emission standard. Next slide, please. The next set of draft regulations are related to the requirements for building portfolios. These are the set of requirements that portfolios would need to maintain to be approved as a portfolio and then to maintain the building portfolio in an approved status. So the first requirement regarding blended emission standards stayed the same, but we did clarify that a blended emission standard is not required for building portfolios that are subject to an individual compliance schedules, because as it has been mentioned before, individual compliance schedules are formed on a basis of absolute emissions, so there is no need for this blended emission standard. We also clarified and reorganized a bit the requirements that are related to environmental justice. So for any building portfolio that includes any of the following set of buildings: first, on-site campus district energy systems, on-site combined heat and power plants, industrial or manufacturing buildings, or energy/power station buildings located in EJ populations, or a combination of both residential buildings located inside and outside environmental justice populations, or finally, a combination of deed restricted residential buildings and other residential buildings. So if any proposed building portfolio has any of these set of buildings that have either buildings with high emissions or combinations of different types of residential buildings, then they would have to meet these requirements as well. First, to submit an emission standard compliance plan within 2 years of the review board's initial approval of the building portfolio. Second, to submit annual progress reports that identify any progress made on the emission standard compliance plan. And finally, to submit an updated emission standard compliance plan every verification year. Next slide, please. I'm gonna go through the different application process and pathways. The overall structure of the application process stayed the same. It's still on a rolling basis with a deadline for September 1st for any approvals or decisions to be reflected for the next compliance year. So that all stayed the same. Next slide, please. Then the review board members might remember that we proposed 3 different application pathways for building portfolios. Those pathways largely stayed the same, but we did clarify and provide more details for the requirements and the review process. So just as a reminder, pathway 1 is for those building portfolios that do not have any of those buildings that trigger an environmental justice review and that meet all of the eligibility criteria for building portfolios. So that is the most standard streamlined pathway that is available. Pathway 2 is for building portfolios that do have those buildings that trigger an environmental justice review and have those extra requirements I mentioned of the emission standard compliance plans, progress reports, and updates. And finally, pathway 3 is for building portfolios that either do not meet the eligibility criteria for building portfolios or are unable to calculate a blended emission standard, or that want to apply for an individual compliance schedule at the same time that they're applying for a portfolio. And in this case, the portfolio may or may not contain those buildings that trigger the environmental justice review. So pathway 3 is for those buildings that have those special cases where they don't meet the standards pathways, sorry. The application requirements are largely the same. For pathway 1, just the confirmation of eligibility criteria and the list of buildings. For pathway 2, we add a map with different environmental justice criteria, and we provided details of that map and a brief narrative description of any near-term actions and preliminary ideas for developing the emission standard compliance plan. For pathway 3, it's largely the same, the list of buildings, and then an explanation of why the owner might not meet the eligibility criteria or might be unable to calculate the blended emission standards. If they're applying for an ICS, then the requirements for their application as well. And then if applicable, the same map with environmental justice criteria and the brief narrative that is required for that. The significant changes in these pathways is the decision-making criteria that the reviewer would use to approve or deny an application. So for pathway 1, which is the most streamlined, and again, the building portfolio does not have those EJ review requirements and meets all of the standard eligibility criteria, then the approval would be based on whether the applicant actually meets those eligibility criteria. This would be the most simple. For pathway 2, the approval would be based on whether the applicant meets the eligibility criteria and on consideration of the potential impacts on and benefits to environmental justice populations based on the information that the owner provided during the application and if applicable in any public hearing requested by the review board. And finally, for pathway 3, which is the more special one, the approval could be based on whether the applicant provided a reasonable basis for not meeting one or more of the eligibility criteria, if that's the case, if the applicant provided a reasonable basis for not using a blended emission standard, if that's the case, if the applicant meets the eligibility criteria for individual compliance schedules, if they're applying at the same time for that, and finally, if applicable, on consideration of the potential impacts on and benefits to environmental justice populations, again, based on information provided by the owner at the time of application in or at the public hearing. Next slide, please. This kind of scary slide just presents the timeline for the different application pathways. They're largely the same, just with slightly different lengths in between steps. So I'll explain in detail pathway 1, and then I'll explain what changes for pathway 2 and 3. So for pathway 1, the first step is that the owner submits an application. Then within 14 days from submission, the Environment Department would confirm that the application is complete. If the application is not complete, then the process would start again, and the owner would need to submit and complete the application. Once the Environment Department confirms that the application is complete, then within 45 days from that confirmation, the review board shall vote to approve with standard conditions or deny the application. And then within 7 days from that vote, the applicant will receive a copy of the review board's decision in a written form. Within 21 days of the issuance of that written decision, the applicant might be able to file a written appeal to the APCC if they desire, or within 30 days from the issuance of that written decision, the applicant must record the approval of the building portfolio with the Registry of Deeds and send proof of that record to the Environment Department. So pathway 2 and 3 follows more or less the same structure, just they will take a bit longer of a review process because, as I mentioned, the complexity and requirements for each of these pathways is different. So for pathway 2, the Environment Department would have 30 days to confirm that the application is complete, and then the review board would have 60 days to decide if they would like to hold a hearing and then vote to approve with standard conditions, special conditions, or to deny the application. And then the same process would unfold of receiving a written decision, having the opportunity to appeal, and the need to record the approval with the Registry of Deeds. Finally, for pathway 3, once the owner submits an application, the Environment Department will have again 30 days from submission to confirm that the application is complete. And then the review board will have 90 days to hold the hearing and approve with standard conditions, special conditions, or deny the application. And then the same process of having a written decision, appeals, and the recording of the decision. Next slide, please.
Claudia, you had a question from Gail, if you want to pause
Sorry.
for a second. Yep.
It's hard to see faces sometimes.
Yeah, and I hope it's okay to ask questions as we go, or do you want us to wait until the end?
I think I'll defer to the chair on that.
I don't know. I would say let's go ahead with this one, Gail, and let's just see how we're doing on time as we
Right,
go.
right.
But why don't you go ahead, Gail?
Yeah, so I just wondered I saw that in the regs, the timing and the requirement to record the building portfolio approval with the registry. I just wondered what the intent or benefit of doing that recording with the registry is. Yeah, I just don't understand the implications of having to record. And then
Yeah.
also, is the owner recording the portfolio, the building portfolio approval as a whole or by individual properties? I'm just curious what that really means.
The recording would be, and this happens with some other permits that we issue in the city, so that a future owner knows about the permit that's been issued in case a seller forgets to tell an owner, it doesn't come up in the transaction. So it's on record when they go to search the title that they'll get notice of this. So what we'd ask them to record is the written decision from the board, which would probably include a list of the buildings that are in the portfolio, any standard or special conditions. It would have things like if involves environmental justice review, that they have to do that report and the schedule for that. So it just will put new owners on notice of their obligations under BERDO.
And if really, just real quick follow-up, if for some reason it's not recorded, the owner doesn't record, are there any implications to the owner in terms of the approval that they received? And also, does that, I assume that even if it's not recorded, whoever is the new owner still has to assume those responsibilities regardless of whether it's recorded or not.
Exactly. It doesn't remove responsibility at all. It's just another mechanism for helping
Yes.
make sure they know. But yeah, it
Everybody's
does not
informed.
change responsibility, nor are we envisioning a mechanism where there's a penalty right now for not recording. That's something we're open to feedback on. But yeah, it would not change the responsibilities for a new owner.
Thank you.
Okay, I will now move on with a few more draft regulations. This is just a summary of the environmental justice review that I've been mentioning, just to clarify it and have it all in the same place. So for those building portfolios that trigger the environmental justice reviews, they will have the following requirements. So at the time of application, the application will require an EJ map, as I mentioned before, and a brief narrative on anticipated near-term compliance actions and plans to develop an emission standard compliance plan. Then within 2 years, the owner would submit the emission standard compliance plan, and the reviewer may decide to hold a hearing to evaluate that plan and to add special conditions. And I will explain a bit more about that in following slides. Then every year thereafter, the owner must submit an annual progress report by July 15. And every verification year thereafter, they must submit an updated emission standard compliance plan. Next slide, please. So we had already mentioned this environmental justice plan at the time of application and as part of the emission standard compliance plans in our proposals. The only significant change in this regard is that we added a few more requirements to that map in response to comments from the community to have metrics related to air pollution and heat resilience as part of the review process for these building portfolios. So apart from the other requirements for the map, the owner shall provide maps that overlay asthma rates, the air toxic respiratory hazard index, and heat resilience metrics as they map their buildings that are part of the building portfolio. And we provide specific data sources for that. All of these sources are official and regularly updated. Next slide, please. Then again, and now as other requirements for the emission standard compliance plans, we mentioned the update of the map that is submitted for the building portfolio application. And then a new addition is to include a narrative description of plans to prioritize distribution of benefits and environmental justice populations and affordable housing, excuse me. And examples of those benefits could include, but need not be limited to, affordability, included as it relates to rents, energy bills, and energy burdens, quality of life, such as public health, indoor air quality and thermal comfort, climate resilience, such as access to cooling, reliable access to affordable energy and backup systems in case of climate shocks, and investments in emission reduction strategies, such as energy efficiency and renewable energy projects. And the goal of this is to recognize that building owners are balancing a myriad of factors and benefits that they could provide to to tenants and those who are in the buildings, and it's not just about emissions reductions. So as part of their plans of compliance, they could mention things like, we are installing heat pumps for cooling in certain buildings that are in environmental justice populations. We know that that will increase emissions for our portfolio, but we are balancing that with emissions reductions or energy efficiency strategies in these other portfolios. So it's just to have a more holistic understanding of building owners' plans for the review board. Next slide, please. Then we provided additional details on the narrative descriptions that building owners would have to provide as part of the plans for the different compliance efforts that are expected to be implemented across the building portfolio over the next 2 compliance cycles. And we provided just a list of possible plans, strategies, measures that building owners could provide up as part of this plan. They do not necessarily need to provide all of these informations. It's just a way to give ideas for building owners. Next slide, please. And then we also clarified a bit more the content of those annual progress reports that I've been mentioning. So by July 15 of each year, building owners shall submit annual progress reports that include a narrative description of any progress towards achieving the measures described in their emission standard compliance plan. And if relevant, building owners shall include information on any efforts that had been delayed or stopped due to extenuating circumstances beyond their control. And building owners are also encouraged to submit, and the review board might be able to request documentation to support that narrative. Next slide, please. And next set of proposals is related to the conditions that the review board might be able to set to approve building portfolios. You might recall that a lot of the comment letters that we received were seeking more clarity about those conditions. So we proposed the following in the draft language. First, that the review board might include the following standard conditions on the approval of any building portfolio. First, the timely compliance with reporting and third-party verification requirements in the ordinance, timely compliance with the requirements of building portfolios, including when applicable, the submission of a satisfactory emission standard compliance plan, and the review board or its designee might inspect any building that is part of an approved building portfolio at reasonable times and with reasonable notice in order to assess compliance with the terms and conditions of that portfolio. So those would be the standard conditions. Next slide, please. We also propose that for building portfolios that are required to have that environmental justice review, the review board might be able to also add special conditions that are relevant to the distribution of benefits to environmental justice populations. So such conditions might be added either at the time of approval of a building portfolio or following the owner's submission of their first emission standard compliance plan. And any proposal to add special conditions shall be discussed at a public meeting, and the review board may also choose to hold a public hearing. And here on the right, I show a timeline of what that would look like if the review board would decide to add special conditions after the submission of an emission standard compliance plan, and not only as part of the application process. So after the owner submits their plans, the review board would have 90 days to decide if they would like to hold a public hearing and to add special conditions. And once that decision is made, then the process of giving a written decision, appeal, and recording, the same that I've been mentioning, starts again. Next slide, please. The draft regulations on the modification of approved building portfolios stayed largely the same, but we did clarify that for building portfolios that are required to complete the emission standard compliance plan, the building owner must submit a short update of that plan to reflect any modification to the building portfolio. And that update shall be submitted at the time of notice or application to modify the portfolio. And naturally, those modifications must also be reflected in any subsequent progress reports and updates to the emission standard compliance plan. Next slide, please. And then here is another timeline of that modification process. The review board shall vote to approve or deny a requested modification at the next regularly scheduled public meeting. and a decision to approve that modification shall be based on whether the building portfolio is at the time of the request in material compliance with the ordinance and any requirements for building portfolios, including any standard or special conditions that were set by the review board. And the timeline is largely the same as the past processes. Once the reviewer holds a public meeting and votes on a modification, then the applicant receives a written notice and has a number of days to appeal or record the decision. Next slide, please. And finally, the termination process for an approved portfolio. So the big change here is how and for what reasons the review board might initiate a proceeding to terminate a building portfolio. So the review board might decide to initiate this proceeding either at its own initiative or upon a petition from the greater of 20% of tenants or 5 tenants of a building included in the building portfolio. And then the review board might decide to revoke an approved building portfolio or to amend the special conditions of that portfolio if the review board determines that either the owner does not materially comply with the requirements for building portfolios or their conditions for that building portfolio, and or absent extenuating circumstances beyond the owner's control, an owner has not prioritized the distribution of benefits to environmental justice populations as proposed in their own plan. Any revocation or amendment shall be subject to a public hearing, and I showed here the timeline, which means it's basically the same as all the ones that I've been presenting. Next slide, please. And I think that's the last one on portfolios, is that the indicators of failure to prioritize the distribution of benefits might include, but are not limited to, the disproportionate allocation across multiple compliance schedules of benefits, investments in BERDO compliance, and or improvements to buildings located outside of EJ populations, buildings in areas with lower rates of asthma, air toxic respiratory hazard exposure, or the urban heat island intensity, or to residential buildings that are not affordable housing. And I think that is all for portfolios.
Okay, wow. Thank you, Claudia, for that. That was a lot of information and a bunch of seemingly pretty important updates. So what we're going to get to now is we'll just go through each board member and see if you all have any questions or comments. And I'll start with you, Board Member Boyd.
Yes, hi. To piggyback off of Gail's question in the chat, which I'm interested in. She said, could MBE utilization in the energy efficient of the property be an environmental justice benefit? And I'm concerned about that. That's important to me because compliance is good as far as the energy efficient part, but what about the people? Like, we're making the building all nice, but how is this going to affect the people? And I have seen it time and time again, and I don't want to see it anymore. That's why I'm sitting here. How is this going to affect the tenant? Is the tenant going to be misplaced while you have to come in? I'm on construction sites all day, every day. The tenant is going to have to move their stuff while it's being retrofitted. Yep. So what about that? And once everything is up to par and energy efficient and all that, can that same tenant still reside in that building, or is it going to be a whole different group of people?
Yeah, these are some really great questions that we're thinking about how to address across the regulations. So with building portfolios, the individual compliance schedules, and particularly with hardship compliance and the equitable investment fund, about where can we kind of attach conditions and kind of give credit for this type of work. So I think like with the MBE utilization, we're open to feedback if that should be part of what we look for as equitable allocation of benefits with building portfolios, or should that be a focus more of the hardship compliance or hardship pathways and getting funding from the Equitable Investment Fund. So we're very open to feedback on how to use it across. And to your point, Rashida, about, sorry, Councillor Boyd, where the people are going, I think that could be part of something we ask people to address in their emissions compliance plan of what is your plan for work? And maybe that part of it is some of the work would be slower in some residential buildings because there needs to be accommodation of making sure people are not displaced or finding places to put them. So I think these plans are a place for building owners and the board to think creatively about how we work around those concerns and address them. And again, we're very open to particular suggestions if you have them of how we can address that.
Yeah, and I would love to like dedicate, is there possible that there will be a phase 4 where we can just concentrate on that? Because the building is for these buildings and it's for the people.
Yeah.
You know, it seems like we're talking about the building is not a person. We need,
Yeah.
it's for the people.
Yeah. No,
So
I think
that is very important that we really discuss that, like really take time and discuss it and see where it could benefit everybody and not just a few, because I've seen it happen.
Yeah.
It's like a deja vu.
and we won't technically have a phase 4 of the regulations, but I think there's a lot of room in this phase 3 to address these issues. So starting now, the next couple of meetings when we're talking about the hardship pathways and the equitable investment fund, we should definitely focus on these issues as part of those discussions because those are opportunities to address them in the regulations. So I'm glad you're raising it now so that we can keep kind of elevating this as a focus point.
All right, it's good to know that we're
Yeah.
focused on that.
Yeah.
Thank you.
No,
And-
thank you.
And just to add to that, while there might be limited avenues to address that through portfolios, that is part of the reason why we have that proposal for tenants to be able to come to the review board and request a building portfolio to be terminated if there's any reason to believe that the building owner is not investing in environmental justice communities and affordable housing or any other of the benefits that we mentioned. So that's just one avenue. But we'll definitely be thinking about this as we go through all the regulations topics.
All right, thank you.
Great, thank you, Board Member Boyd for bringing it up. I appreciate it. Board Member Jacobs.
My question was kind of answered while, excuse me, Board Member Boyd was talking about it with the responses that came in. So for now, I'm good. Thank you.
Great. Councilor Laura, welcome, and would you like to just offer any comments or questions?
Thank you so much. This is, it's been incredibly informative and it's been really helpful to me as I think about my role here as a board member. I don't have any specific questions right now. I think I have a grasp on what is here. I think as we move more into the process, situationally, I think I'll have more questions as things come up. But right now, this was really straightforward. And if anything comes up in the future, I'll make sure to reach out. But thank you so much for the presentation.
Great. I saw your hand up, Gail. Board Member Lattimore.
Yes, thank you. I just wanted to understand, I heard to my question also about the MBE utilization and in terms of the energy efficiency, the actual work to do the energy, to complete the energy efficiency and bring the building up to the decarbonization standards. And, you know, are there any limitations? I think I heard Claudia say limitations around certain things that this board can do. We certainly don't want to, you know, make it, I'm a developer, so I know it can be difficult to deal with affordable housing and do all kinds of retrofits and that kind of thing too. Also, so don't want to make it, you know, overly complex for folks, but also this is about equity as you know, the Lavette and others and Rashida have mentioned. And so wondered what are those limitations, if any? What can the review board actually do in terms of, you know, including those type of things like MBE utilization, not only in the build out of energy efficiency, but also in the special conditions for approval of portfolios. I mean, are there limitations? So that's my question, like, in that balance between what we ask developers or, excuse me, owners to do. But are there limitations to what we can, you know, kind of put in those categories?
So there are some, I mean, municipalities in Massachusetts obviously have a lot of authority to take their own actions, but we are subject to certain state and federal laws that put a cap on what we can require. Um, Labor is a piece I'm not an expert in, but where it's can be difficult to specify, like who to hire or under kind of what conditions. So the reason we think it fits probably more easily in the hardship plans and in the funds from the equitable investment fund is there we're really giving building owners like an incentive. It's an extra, like if you're getting that funding, that's something you're applying and asking for, and so it's easier to add conditions to that. If it's about how they comply with the ordinance, it's harder to put conditions on where we don't have authority in that space. So if we want to say a way of thinking about equity, this is one of many metrics, that might be something we have space for, but to say you have to do X when it's not an area where you have complete control, that gets more difficult.
Okay,
So we're
yeah.
constantly looking at that balancing from the legal
Mhm.
perspective, and then to your point, what's doable on a compliance side.
Thank you. I would certainly suggest that we make those options and, if there's a way to say we look more favorably, but maybe that's not legal on approving those type of portfolios and
Yeah.
compliance plans that kind of have those elements built into them. If there's a way to put that in there without a straight requirement, I think that would, for me, be really helpful.
No, we appreciate that input, and we are kind of constantly looking at what the balance is for what we can ask or encourage owners to do. So thank you.
Great, thanks, Board Member Lattimore and Alidine for that. Yeah, I mean, my comments, I definitely revolve a lot around this, and one angle I was just thinking about this from is like, how do we work with folks in the city who talk about tenant rights and tenant protections, and just figure out how to, one, make sure that we elevate what already is existing for those tenants, but two, are there other things that we might be able to add to? And I don't know how again, what the limitations are here, but yeah, I just share some of the concerns that have been brought up. I appreciate the piece on the opportunity for tenants to petition, want to talk more through that, I think, and think through that a little bit more. But I think that seems like a good opportunity and a good thing to include. But I am thinking a lot about, as we go through this process, we obviously are talking a lot about the building owners and the how do we incentivize it and make this happen. And at the same time, I appreciate the thinking around how do we ensure that tenants understand their rights, just as tenants, period, I think, but also in the context of the work that might be done to their buildings as a result of this ordinance. So I have more thinking to do on that, but I would like to.
Yeah. I would flag a few places where we would love input. One is on the narrative that would come with a building portfolio application. One of the pieces we've asked owners to think about is how they would engage tenants in developing their emissions compliance plan. So that's another potential piece for tenant engagement, to let people know, what's coming, get input. And so we can always think about more guidance on what that could look like, giving people, suggestions of how to engage, what types of information to share with tenants. When it comes to kind of tenant protections, it is another space where we operate within the limits of the state law, but it's also a place where BERDO is not in isolation within the city. We have other initiatives in the city, obviously, around affordable housing and protecting tenant rights.
Great. Board Member Lattimore, we'll come back to your question in the chat, but I think let's give Board Member O'Malley and Palmer Dunning an opportunity, and then we'll give another round if we need it. So Board Member O'Malley.
Great, thank you. And again, stellar work as always by the environment team. Thank you for that very thorough overview. Thank you to my fellow board members for some really excellent and worthwhile points and comments, of which I agree with all of them. Wanted to specifically call out in a very positive way the language relative to providing maps that overlay different respiratory issues and as well as heat resiliency. I think that's super important, so appreciate that. If that was done before I would join this board, well done all around. A question, two quick questions I had. One was, when you think about portfolios, there is going to be some cross-jurisdictional issues we may have to think of with Cambridge specifically, which passed their own building decarbonization, and we don't need to get into that now, but perhaps that's something that we could work with them to see how buildings that would otherwise qualify, although I suppose they wouldn't be registered with City of Boston or with Suffolk County, but that is going to be an issue, I think, for some of our colleges, university, and health centers and life science centers. So that's one sort of cross-jurisdictional buildings that would otherwise be in a portfolio. And then the second one is somewhat pedantic, but with the flow chart, which I think is super important, because one thing that we came up against originally drafting BERDO, and then now I've heard from a number of folks is support, but a lot of I guess confusion may be too harsh of a word, but sort of knowing what the right steps are and what the right pathways are. So I think these flow charts are super important and well done, and for a visual learner like me, very, very helpful. Well, the days associated with each step, be it, petitioning the review board or having to appeal to the APCC, 7 days, 45 days, 90 days, are those business days or calendar days? And the only reason I ask is because specifically as it relates to registering something with the Register of Deeds, and if we're talking about potentially finding that, the schedule of a county office can be constricted with holidays and whatnot. So curious on that issue.
Yeah. So on the days question is calendar days at the moment, because that's how it's defined in the ordinance, but we're definitely open to feedback if that should be changed specifically for that, for those requirements.
I think we could also, an upcoming section of the regulations will focus on enforcement. We could always make clear that there wouldn't be enforcement if that 30-day deadline falls on a Saturday. I think we could work that in. I think on the question on cross-jurisdiction, we'd be very open to hearing your thoughts. At the moment, we're not anticipating cross-jurisdiction. The portfolio would be Boston buildings, even if an owner has some that, obviously straddle both cities, but happy to discuss that more.
Right.
Great, thanks, Board Member O'Malley. Board Member Palmer Dunning.
Thanks. Yeah, thank you to the Environment Department staff for the really thorough presentation. I don't have any specific questions at the time. I think a lot of my concerns were covered by the other board members, so appreciate it.
Great, thank you. Gail, do you want to come back to your question in the chat, and then obviously other board members, we can do one more round if there are any other questions that have surfaced for you, but we do want to keep it moving. I know we have a bunch more on individual compliance schedules, but Gail, please.
Yeah, I won't belabor it because I did put it in the chat, but just wondered if there's any reason why we could not wait or score the applications, as relates to our decision-making process, and put more weight in certain areas than others, like the equity pieces.
Yeah, I think we would welcome feedback on that. What I think we saw from the comments last time was for applicants having an understanding of kind of what the review process will look like, so they have some certainty of like how to prepare their applications, what material. So I think we'd want to be able to present what that would look like. So open to ideas on that.
Great. And then just related to timing, and I can't remember if we covered it here or if I read it in so as I started reading the revised regs, the timing of decision-making as for this review board as relates to the anticipated volume of applications, because I understand starting September 1st of this year, or is it next year? This year, the applications will be started to be accepted.
They can be accepted, probably it'll be near to the beginning of next year once all the regulations are final. But the September 1st deadline in 2024 would be for a decision effective in 2025. So we hope they'll be staggered, but there could be a large number submitted around September 1st.
I just wanted to see, I know that this is something I'm sure that the staff have thought about, but as board members, review board members, I think there's like what, 6,000 or 11,000 buildings that are kind of in that BERDO range, and then how we kind of stay on target with those decision-making timeframes, given the volume and the flow. That's all I wanted to see, if the staff had thought about what that might look like in terms of volume for this body.
So we have, and I
Yeah.
should clarify, these applications could even start in 2023 if the relevant sections of the regulations are finalized earlier. So I think a piece that we'll be doing with it is helping to create like the standard forms for applications, some review metrics for the review board to help kind of that process. But yes, we recognize it's potentially a lot.
Yeah, and the proposed timelines right now consider being able to deliver a decision in a timeline where there could be multiple hearings to make that decision. But definitely open to feedback if review board members feel that that would still be not enough time for some of these applications.
Just something to analyze at the right point sooner than later in terms of an anticipated volume for this body.
Right. Do any of the other members of the board just have any last questions or comments they'd like to make? And then I think we should get to the individual compliance schedules soon. Okay. Hearing none, then I'm gonna pass it back to you, Claudia. Again, members of the public, you will have an opportunity after we're finished with the next round of board questions and answers to offer some feedback as well. But we're gonna go on to this section, and again, let's try to let Claudia get through her presentation, and then if you can write down your comments or put them in the chat, your questions. I think that's another way we can record them for now.
Perfect. I will move on to individual compliance schedules. And again, I will try to highlight any significant changes from the preliminary proposals we presented before, as well as any very relevant regulations as it pertains to the review board. So next slide, please. So first, the eligibility criteria for individual compliance schedules, or ICS, has remained unchanged. So I will not dwell on that. But just so you know, there's no significant changes there. Next slide, please. A lot of the comments that we receive pertain to the types of historical data that might be acceptable to build baseline years for ICS. So we added some language clarifying the types of documents and data that building owners can use. For energy use, for emissions factors, for the electricity grid, emissions factors for district energy systems, as well as GFA. So those are some possible documents that might be used. And we also have a language that says that owners can bring other records or data to the review board for their consideration, and the review board could have discretion of accepting a different type of document. Next slide, please. The application process, very similar to building portfolios, rolling basis, September 1st deadline to have the approvals apply for the following compliance year, that it's all the same. We just added the clarification that if building owners wish to apply for a building portfolio and an ICS at the same time, then they have to follow the pathway tree that I had presented before for building portfolios. Next slide, please. The requirements for applications for individual buildings remain largely the same. We did clarify that at the moment of any significant emissions reduction efforts completed from the baseline year to the present, and any changes in GFA that did not significantly increase energy use or emissions, as well as a brief narrative of expected methods.
Claudia, you're
Claudia?
going in and out. Could you try turning off your video to see if that helps your connection?
Thanks, Aladeen.
Yep, if you're there. Okay, maybe I'll take over for a minute till Claudia gets back.
Thanks,
Although,
Aladeen.
to be fair, I have not seen her slides, but I think I know where she's going. So as you were saying, the application requirements, that narrative of things that have been done to the building kind of up and to the point of application, a brief narrative description of expected methods to meet the proposed alternative emission standard reduction schedule, and if relevant, if they're not able to meet any eligibility criteria, and explanation for that inability. The next slide, please. And so again, on the application requirements, some of this is the same, again, choosing the base year. And in response to a lot of questions that we got in the comments, we have clarified that buildings in a building portfolio may have different baseline years. Building owners or applicants will have to propose what their alternative emission standard reduction schedule will be for the portfolio, if it's for a portfolio rather than an individual building. And again, we gave some clarification on how to create a baseline for a building portfolio with the buildings have different baseline years. And that needs to be third-party verified. If you use a single baseline year, you would not need the third-party verification. Again, similar narratives to an application for an ICS for an individual building as well. Next slide.
Hey, Aladine, I
Yes,
looks
sorry.
like Claudia is back.
Oh, wonderful.
Let's see if she can hear us. though.
Yes.
Claudia, can
Yes.
you hear us?
Perfect.
Yes.
Take it
Okay,
back.
great.
Thank you.
I'm so sorry. My computer just rebelled against me,
It's all good.
but I'm back.
Thanks, Aladine.
I think we were done with this slide, right?
Yeah.
Perfect. And apologies for just dropping off. But I'll move on to the review process for ICS. Following the same logic of building portfolios, the Environment Department shall review the application for completeness and in this case, technical accuracy for the build of the baseline. And then the review board shall hold a hearing to evaluate applications for building portfolios and may hold a hearing for applications for individual buildings. And we also clarified the criteria that the review board shall consider when making decisions for these applications. So the review board shall consider if the application demonstrates that the building or building portfolio should have an emission standard different than the one applicable under the ordinance, if there had been significant emission reductions at the building or building portfolio since the baseline year, if there are any extenuating circumstances that support the need for an ICS, and if relevant, the reason for an impact of any liability to meet the eligibility criteria for ICS. The review board may vote to deny or approve applications with standard conditions regarding timely compliance with the ordinance and with the requirements for ICS, similar to building portfolios. And the review board might include also special conditions for ICS that do not meet the eligibility criteria. Next slide, please. Here is also a timeline of ICS. It follows the same logic as building portfolios. Once the owner submits an application, the Environment Department has 30 days to confirm that that application is complete. And then within 90 days, the review board shall hold the hearing and vote to approve with standard conditions, special conditions, or to deny the application. And then we have 7 days to have a written decision, 21 days for an appeal, and 30 days for the recording of the decision. Next slide, please. The modification process for an approved ICS remained largely the same. We did clarify that another reason to have a modification of an approved ICS is due to any changes to an approved ICS because of the addition of a building to a building portfolio or institutional master plan that has an ICS, and that the reviewer shall approve requests for modification that adjust an ICS using a standard methodology adopted in guidance by the Commission. And the reviewer may hold a hearing for any request to modify an ICS if they use a different methodology from the standard one. Next slide, please. And finally, we have also the termination process for an approved ICS. We clarified that an ICS for a building portfolio shall be automatically terminated if the building portfolio itself is terminated. And then we clarified that the review board might initiate a proceeding to revoke or amend an ICS if the review board determines that an owner does not materially comply with the requirements for ICS or the conditions for said ICS. And any amendment shall be at the review board's discretion and based on a finding that the material non-compliance was due to unique circumstances beyond the owner's control. Any proposed revocation or amendment shall also be discussed at a public hearing, and there will be a notice at least 30 days in advance. And then I have the same timeline in regards to giving a written decision, opportunity to appeal, and the need to record the decision. And I think that might be it, but next slide. Yes, we did. And thank you for your patience as I talk through all of this. Chair, I believe you're muted.
Thanks for that. I was talking. Appreciate you, Claudia, for all of that, and Aladeen for jumping in. And yeah, we're gonna get to our next round of review board kind of questions and comments. So I will again start with Board Member Boyd.
I just want to know, what does compliance mean beyond energy efficiency? And I would really like to focus on that in the near future, sooner than later, possibly. That's it, thank you.
So do you mean when we say as a requirement that they're in compliance with the ordinance? Is that the question?
Yeah, I just want to know, I want to know more so about how it affects the people. Like how we can throw it in there, like in the clause, we can throw it in there when it comes to environmental justice areas. I know we can't force everyone to do, because we're dealing with different tiers of portfolios. But when it comes to environmental justice, I just really want to make sure that the people are protected in that area. That's all. And I really want to focus on that. I really do.
And I would just flag, yeah, compliance when we talk about would mean compliance with any requirements, in the ordinance, in the regulations, or in the standard, or any special conditions to the approval of a building portfolio or an individual compliance schedule. So if those conditions talk about issues, on kind of environmental justice issues or others, that would be part of what is compliance, is meeting those conditions.
Okay. Thank you.
Yeah, and also to clarify, any building portfolio that has an individual compliance schedules and is required to have that EJ review will also have that EJ review. So just like that doesn't disappear just because of having an individual compliance schedule, just to make it clear as well.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks, Board Member Boyd. Board Member Jacobs.
No questions at the moment.
Council Lara. I'll come back to Council Lara. Board Member Lattimore.
No questions.
No, also, I again appreciate the presentation and clarity on like where the language was drafted. I also don't have any specific questions right now. I think I'm good. I'm going to pass it to Board Member O'Malley.
Thank you. Ditto. Thank you, Claudia, again for a great overview. Obviously, we anticipate a significant number of folks looking to somehow create their own individual compliance schedule, and we want to be clear that there are guidelines in place, and sort of the default numbers were put in for a reason. But I think it's really I think it'll be really well regarded and well received by folks that we've laid out sort of the clearer pathway here, particularly allowing for the the narrative piece, which I think is important for an individual building owner to tell their story. So just to be clear, we will render our decision. The building owner can then appeal it to the APCC, and that's the final. They're the Supreme Court of the United States for all intents and purposes. Hopefully not this Supreme Court, but that's it. There's no appeal after APCC. That's correct.
That is how it's written now. Yep.
Right.
That within the
Okay.
city, the last appeal would be the APCC.
Terrific. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Board Member O'Malley. Board Member Palmer Dunning.
Nope, no questions at this time. Thank you.
Okay. Council Lara, I'm not sure if you could hear us. Are you with us? And would you just have any comments or questions?
Councilor Lara did write in the chat. No
Okay.
questions for me. Sorry, just doing a diaper change.
All right, got it. All right then. I think if there, I'll give one last opportunity to any other members of the review board, any other just final comments or questions, and then we will get to moving to public comment. Okay. So with that, I guess we can open up, public comments, this meeting to public comment, and I think it can be on both sections, right? We just went over a lot of material on both individual compliance schedules, but also the building portfolios. And so as a reminder to members of the public, if you want to provide public comment, you can raise your hand or type in the chat. And in the application via the Zoom meeting platform, if you're calling in and you can't use that platform, just raise your hand by pressing *9. You can also send your questions to staff via email at brb@boston.gov. We would like you all to just say your name and maybe what neighborhood you're from, introduce yourself. We would like you to try to stay to 3 minutes so we can make sure everybody has a chance to speak. And I think we will just open it up right now. So any members of the public, please. I'm going to switch my view so I can see everybody here. No questions or comments from the public? Again, you're welcome to add it to the chat. Or of course, welcome to speak up. We'd love to have your ideas. I know people have also submitted a ton already via the sort of process we have outlined so far, and through online. I think people have submitted a ton of comments, which we really appreciate. But if there are any other things that people want to bring up right now, this is it's a good chance. Okay. Okay, Wheezy, I see your hand up, please.
And I apologize if this is something that's been asked before and or this isn't an appropriate place to ask Chairman Matsueda, but I'd like to ask if the city has ever done an analysis of the potential impact on tenants of the BERDO law.
Fantastic question. Thank you, Wheezy. Does anyone from the city know if that type of analysis or consideration was done as we kind of went into this? I know obviously the tenant issue was brought up all along throughout the process, but was there an actual analysis? Do we know of any of our other sister cities who might also be doing something similar? Because I know this is an issue that shows up anywhere where this type of work is happening.
Yeah, so I can start. So we don't have a formal analysis per se, but there were several years of engagement with community groups, stakeholders throughout the city in the development of the ordinance, and it is still an ongoing part of conversations with various community groups and others. So it's definitely an issue of attention.
May I clarify my question? Because I
Yeah,
really
please do.
appreciate the work that was done with that engagement with the community. And I've tracked back through a lot of it. I'm more asking, and I wasn't clear, I apologize, whether Sheila Dillon, the housing department, anybody who's housing specialist in the city was engaged with this for potential of what could happen to residents in the city. Whether that engagement included going to people in the city responsible for keeping people from losing their housing.
So the housing department was engaged in the development process. I personally don't have a lot of details. I wasn't at the city yet, but I do know that they were engaged.
Gives us something to learn from, to gather the info and learn from them. Thank you.
Yeah, Mr. Chair, if I may just add to that.
Please,
Hi,
please
Weezy.
do, Board Member
Good to
O'Brien.
see you. Yes, Sheila Dillon was and her team were absolutely involved during the drafting of the initial ordinance. Obviously, the regs came after I left the council, more specifically, but there's language relative to affordable housing, tenants protections. Weezy, I'm inferring your question is to make sure that we don't see wholesale displacement of tenants because of cost associated. Fair point. That absolutely led a lot of our conversations and the collaborative approach to drafting this, and you know, I think it's something that we all as board members care very, very deeply about, and believe that you can certainly solve for both, make sure that we're able to protect affordability while at the same time making sure that we lead the nation with the most resilient buildings in our city. But I appreciate the point.
Great. Yeah, thank you for that. Yeah, helpful, Board Member O'Malley, to have you, remind us of some of the history you've been involved from way back in this process. So it's really, I think for that reason, it's really helpful to also have you on here. Great. Any other comments or questions from members of the public?
I believe there's a hand up for
Yeah,
Tarshia.
I see Tarshia. Welcome, Tarshia, please.
Hello, thank you. Thank you all. I just have a question on the portfolios. Is there a point in this where we're going to talk about which neighborhoods specifically are going to have larger projects, or which buildings specifically are going to have be a part of this process? I'm just trying to figure that out. As a resident who lives in Dorchester, I know that it's 15 buildings or more, for 15 units or more, a part of this portfolio, but really wanting to know, is there going to be a conversation about neighborhood impacts and where would that take place? And will we have a specific list of like these buildings on this street at any point in this process?
Yeah, that's a great question. So for the building portfolios in particular, that will be up to building owners to identify which buildings they'd want to put into a portfolio. And so part of the information we've asked them to provide in that application is a map of where the buildings are located, overlaid with information about environmental justice populations, some of those health impacts that we talked about. So that will be the point where we have an idea of the specific location of portfolios, and then they'll develop their emission compliance plans that will talk about how they'll comply across those buildings that may spread across different neighborhoods.
And I can add to that. I think Aidan will talk about this later, but we do have a BERDO map that shows where all the BERDO covered buildings are. But even with that map, we don't know which buildings will be applying for a building portfolio because it's not mandatory for building owners to choose that. So that could give you an idea perhaps of where BERDO buildings are located in the city, but we won't know where building portfolios will be until we get applications, if that makes sense.
Can I ask a follow-up question to that then?
Yeah, please do.
You said unless they get applications. So if a building doesn't ask for a portfolio or an application, they won't be a part of this process? Or does that get decided somewhere else? I'm trying to understand. I was a little confused by that.
No, so building portfolios are a flexibility mechanism. So building owners can choose to apply for them, but they're not automatic. So you don't get a portfolio automatically. You have to choose and apply for it.
And to further clarify, if they don't get a portfolio, their building is still subject to BERDO, and they'll still have to meet the requirements. They'll just do it one building at a time. That's kind of the default, is that each building complies on its own. If they want to apply for a building portfolio, as Claudia said, that's the flexibility mechanism that the review board would review and approve.
So my previous question as to knowing the buildings, we will only know the buildings of those who apply for a portfolio at this current time. The individual buildings will find that out later.
No, I think that's where Claudia had the point that Aidan will show us a map that shows where all the buildings subject to BERDO are in the city. So you can see that now.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, Tarshia, you should definitely, I started to play around with the map, and I think it sounds like it's been updated even since I last looked at it. So maybe when Aidan presents in the next section, if you have additional questions, but I think he's going to share some information, and there's a live link that I think you can access that starts to allow you to look at buildings directly in your neighborhood, which ones, you know, are a part of this already. I see your hand up, board member Palmer Dunning. Is there something you'd like to add?
Yeah, I have a question. It's a bit in the weeds, so I apologize if there isn't an answer right now. Say there's a building that's seeking an ICS, and it is a couple of years into the life cycle of its HVAC system. And over the course of the next 7 years, it takes every emissions reduction measure that it can. But it's still within the life cycle of its current HVAC system. So it doesn't make sense from a financial standpoint to upgrade that. Will there be flexibility built in for those types of buildings?
Yeah, oh, sorry, I let him go ahead.
No, I was just gonna say it's a great question, and I think we'd love feedback on the criteria we've proposed for the review board to review and approve an ICS, if you think those are broad enough. And just remembering that another compliance option for a building might be hardship if they, you know, have a reason that they want to delay compliance. So a pathway for hardship or relief in hardship could be an alternative timeframe of compliance. And then also just as a reminder that the direct compliance is just one of the compliance pathways under BERDO. So we'd probably want to think about what else that building could be doing in the interim. So I think it could play a role in ICS, it could play a role in hardship, but we'd love your thoughts on whether the criteria for reviewing ICS you think are flexible enough.
Certainly want, if there's any follow-up on that, board member Palmer Dunning, please, but I also want to make sure we allow any other members of the public that have questions to please bring those up. Okay, any questions or comments from the public? We really would welcome them. And then I think as we referenced, there is one more agenda item or another agenda item here specifically on BERDO reporting and disclosure. And I think Aiden's going to share that. So that's next on the agenda. Okay. There are no further comments or questions from the public. Thank you all. I think, as I said, the next is just an update on BERDO reporting and disclosure. We're going to have a presentation on a new sort of interactive BERDO compliance map. So Aiden, take it away.
Oh, sorry. Super quickly before Aiden
Sure.
presents, just going to review some of the next steps from here.
Oh, thank you. Sorry, Diana.
No, it's okay. I'll be quick. So as I mentioned at the top of the meeting, there is a comment period that's open right now, and it will close August 11th at 12 p.m. It was opened by the Air Pollution Control Commission. After reviewing comments received during that formal comment period, the BERDO team will then, take all that feedback and revise the language and present at the following Air Pollution Control Commission meeting, which is August 16th. And at its discretion, the APCC may open a second public comment period for 21 days or vote to approve the regulations. So that's for building portfolios and individual compliance schedules. And for the remaining 3 topics, so we've been talking a little bit about hardship compliance plans, the Equitable Emissions Investment Fund. We're hoping to present preliminary regulations at the August 16th meeting as well. And following that, fines and enforcement as well. And then this is the visual timeline, just so folks can kind of see where they're kind of falling. And I think we had a brief board Q&A, but Chair, I'll leave it to you if you feel we've covered.
No, that's great. I really appreciate that. That's super helpful to understand kind of what's next in our timeline here. So yeah, I think board members, if you do have any comments or questions specific to that, please let's do that. And then apologies, Aiden, we'll get to you as soon as we wrap this part up. Board member Lattimore.
Yeah, let's see. What was my question? I got a little distracted just now. Oh, I know what it was. So with the comment period, I assume board members can also make comments similar to questions and comments that we've had here during the comment period. And or is there an opportunity for board members? I know all our meetings are public meetings, but is there an opportunity to have, flesh out some of the issues that we've talked about collectively here tonight to get more feedback, or should we just submit through the comment period? Any comments that we have?
So, yeah, I think we welcome comments individually, and I think if the board wants to work together on comments, we do have the open meeting laws, so we could set up a special meeting where you could all have that discussion. So if we want to follow up, we are happy to arrange that opportunity.
Thank you. I will consider individual comments for sure. I will
Yeah.
try my best to get them in before that August 11th deadline, but want to see if my peers,
Yeah.
how they feel about any special meetings to discuss some of the other items, the
We
various
can,
items.
I'd say we could also add as an agenda item for the next meeting.
Mhm.
Yeah,
That should
definitely.
Yeah.
be sufficient time.
Great.
Yeah.
Thank you.
I'll circle back on our list. Board Member Boyd. Any questions and comments?
No, I'm all set, but I would love to piggyback off of what Gail said in that same vein. That would be great if we can follow through with that.
Certainly. Board Member Jacobs.
All set, no comments.
Board Member Lattimore, anything else? I'm sorry, let's go to Councilor Lara.
No questions either. Thank you.
Board Member Lattimore, any other comments, questions? Okay. I'm also good on this. Yeah, we just gonna have to make sure we're clear on, I think we're gonna talk about this in our last sort of administrative update section, just confirm what our next meeting is. And that'll help us determine whether or not we can just include it in that meeting, because it makes the most sense if we got stuff on the calendar to include further conversation on the issues that were brought up in advance of the next APCC meeting. Board Member O'Malley
None from me, thank you.
and Board Member Palmer Dunning.
No question at this time.
Okay. All right, so thanks for getting us back on track there, Diana. And now we get to go to the next agenda item on BERDO reporting and disclosure and a new presentation on new interactive BERDO compliance map. Aiden, now you can take it away.
All right, perfect. All right, thanks so much, Lee. You can go to the next slide. Okay, so just some reminders to kick things off. So for 2023 reporting based on 2022 data, that was due on May 15th. Extensions are being granted for all buildings reporting to BERDO for the first time this year, and for buildings that are unable to report due to extenuating circumstances that we've outlined through our extension request process. So that updated deadline for those that have received an extension is August 15th. So we do expect reporting and engagement to ramp up here over the next few weeks. 2022 reporting on 2021 data is well past due at this point. Any properties that have not completed the third-party verification process are not in compliance with 2022 reporting. And I would note too that disclosed 2021 data has been posted to Analyze Boston. It's a static data set, and paired with that, if you go to the next slide, will be this BERDO reporting compliance map, which should be posted, if not now, at some point early tomorrow morning, to the Analyze Boston BERDO website. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen and just show this map to folks. Okay, so just a moment here. Okay, can folks see that? Okay, great. So we released the BERDO reporting compliance map for 2021 reported data, and again, this is static, so it's not updating automatically, but we're continuing to work with the analytics team to make sure that both this map and the disclosure data set are being updated automatically, so that as soon as new data is submitted, this map is updated. So just to kind of show y'all around here, I can zoom into any one area and see all of the buildings subject to BERDO. On the left-hand side, we have the statuses and what their color gradients mean. If I were to click on a particular parcel here, I see this is the New England Aquarium. It's in compliance. I just get some very high level information, building address, square footage, and then some basic information about the energy usage intensity and the overall energy usage. And if there are multiple buildings within this parcel that reported, so within a specific tax parcel, there might be 2 or more buildings that have to report individually. Those each have their own BERDO IDs. If I click on this arrow here in the top right of that box, I'm taken to the second BERDO ID within this parcel. Looks like the movie theater tied to the aquarium reported separately. And so I can scroll through and just see how the different buildings have been performing. So again, this is just a very high level look. And, right now I'm zooming into downtown, and, there's a lot of blue here. But, these are properties that have reported to BERDO probably since 2013. They're larger buildings, and they're used to that BERDO reporting process. So that compliance rate is going to be, it's simply going to be better. But if I were to zoom out, not too far, and head out a little bit further out from city center, we get into buildings that are a smaller size. And as a result of that, well, they would have had to start reporting to BERDO just last year. So the compliance rate is lower. There's a lot more red out here. And this is what we're really targeting, all of this red for to increase engagement, to increase that compliance rate. So this map is something that I believe the link to this map is within the slide deck. But I believe tomorrow morning we should be posting that to the Analyze Boston website as well, for folks to just go in and play around with. And I know I can't recall her name, but she asked a question as to what properties around her are subject to BERDO. So this is just a great way to zoom into a particular area and just see not only whether or not they're covered by BERDO, but whether or not they're complying with the ordinance. So I'll go ahead and stop my share. But well, you know what? I'll go to the last slide first and then open it up to questions.
Sorry, 1 second.
So yeah, Diana, if you don't mind. Yeah, thank you. Okay, next slide, Diana. Okay, so just a quick update on 2023 reporting progress on 2022 data. So, about 40% of properties have submitted their 2022 data as of last week. 25% have requested extensions, and about 35% have not yet taken action on reporting this year. So this is just showing the comparison month over month since the last time that I reported these numbers. We expect the number of buildings in compliance to improve by a much greater number than it has over the last month as we approach the August 15th deadline. And as we continue our outreach to owners that have not yet requested an extension we have their contact information. We want to engage them before that time. So just at a high level, this is where things stand. And I believe that's it from my end. So happy to open it up to any questions.
All right, thank you, Aiden, for that update. I know already there are some questions just asking for the link, and so are you able to share that in the chat so that folks can have an opportunity to look at that? I think I happened to find it on, or a version of this on Analyze. There it is. Thank you, Aiden. Great. So I think we can open it up to questions from the board. Any questions from you, board member, or comments, board member Boyd?
No, thank you, Aiden, for that. That's very helpful. No.
Great. Board member Jacobs?
No questions.
Councilor Lara?
No questions either. Thank you so much.
Yep.
The map is incredibly helpful, though. I'm gonna take a look at it and look at where things are in my district as well.
Great. Board member Lattimore?
No questions. I'm trying to find my properties and I might follow up with you, Aiden.
Yeah, I think Aiden, my comments on this is, I think it's super helpful to have like the visual, the map, right? And I was also just looking at like some of the other ways to access data that have been sort of already accumulated. So I'm going to be doing some thinking or maybe providing some more specific comments about ways to make that just as accessible as possible. I know the maps, the visuals just in general are really helpful, but there might be other data sets or specific things in there that I might have some recommendations or questions on specifically. But again, appreciate the map, and it was nice to see the updates, because I think the older version I looked at, I was having some problems with for whatever reason, but this is super helpful.
Yeah, and I would say this, the map is meant to be pretty high level in terms of the actual data that we report here. So if you are looking to really dive in and really get a better sense of where a particular property stands, I would just have that actual spreadsheet, that disclosure data set open alongside it.
Great. Board member O'Malley.
No questions. This is great. Well done, team. The comments would just echo. You will absolutely see more and more buildings who haven't reported anything rectify that, because as we all know, that sunlight's the ultimate disinfectant. So this is great work, and look forward to playing around with it. Well done.
And board member Palmer Dunning.
Yeah, thanks. This is great. Thank you for showing us this, Aiden. Will the shape file be available for this? I think it'd be interesting to see this overlaid with other JS mapping tools, for instance, like the state's environmental justice track tool, as well as other GIS tools that kind of show on different factors.
That is my understanding, but I can't speak to it with certainty right now, unless anyone else on the team knows. It's my understanding that we do want this map to be overlaid with other information, environmental justice communities, urban heat island effect. Happy to talk about different ways in which we can kind of overlay that data. But beyond that, I can't speak to its flexibility right now in overlaying with those data sets.
I would just echo that is the goal, because it can also then be a tool for, building owners that are applying for portfolios that do the EJ review, to have a tool where they can go to help with those overlays. If we can figure that out, would be great. And again, for the review board's use as well.
Great, thank you.
And then one quick clarification, if I may, Chair.
Yeah.
The official link might change tomorrow morning. So if it changes, I can let the review board know. I can share a link because I think it officially rolls out to the public tomorrow morning, and I'm not sure if that means the link changes or not.
Okay,
I'll post a link to where we expect this map to live. It's the BERDO disclosure analyze Boston website, but I'll
Great.
post a link to that.
okay, any just last questions or comments from members of the board? I think we do want to invite the public also to just provide any questions or comments, and then we have really just one more item after this. Okay. So if no other comments or questions from the board, let's open it up to public comment. And as a reminder to members of the public, if you want to provide public comment, you can raise your hand or type in the chat in the application via the Zoom meeting platform. If you're calling in, you can't use that platform, raise your hand by pressing *9. Also send your questions via staff to staff via email at brb@boston.gov. And again, let's please introduce yourself, your name and your neighborhood, and try to limit any questions or comments to 3 minutes. And please, anybody from the public who'd like to offer any other questions or comments regarding this agenda, and we'd really welcome it. Yeah, please, Tarshia.
Tashia, Dorchester resident. I just have a question on what is happening or going to happen to either incentivize or to get the buildings that are not reporting to report. I don't know if I missed that in the conversation, but I got the link, so I automatically went and looked to my neighborhood, and the city of Boston, it says, is not in compliance for Franklin Field. So if the city's not setting the example as to reporting and things like that, who's going to make sure that those buildings are reporting? Is there a plan for that? Or does that happen outside of this space? It was just a question.
Great, thanks for that.
Yeah, sure. So, in terms of the city compliance, it's, that they each, city of Boston owned parcel has reported for 2021 data. So there were a few fringe cases where the property owner name was the city of Boston, but the city did not actually own the building on that parcel. So yeah, happy to take a look at any specific cases there. But for outreach and engagement for increasing the number of properties that are in compliance, there are definitely a few different approaches that we're trying to take here. I think Councilor Laura noted that she's going to take a look at her district and see which properties are out of compliance. We intend to work directly with city councilors and neighborhood liaisons, the mayor's office of housing to increase that compliance rate. Then externally with community-based organizations and other organizations with that wider reach. We have that full list of addresses and properties that are simply out of compliance at this time. And beyond that, we do know there are a handful of properties that are receiving our letters and simply not taking any action. So we will eventually get to the point where we're issuing fines. There are still some processes to work out internally as to how we're going to move forward with that, but that is our intention, and that we expect to see an increase in compliance rate through that process.
Yeah, and I'll just add to that a reminder that fines and enforcement is part of the phase 3 of the regulations process. So we need to work through those regulations this phase so that we can move to penalties and fines and enforcement as well.
Thank you. Any other members of the public have comments or questions? Please raise your hand. You're welcome to use the chat and just come off mute. Okay. Hearing none, I think we're just going to see any last comments or questions from members of the board. If not, we're going to move on to our last agenda item. Yeah, Board Member Palmer Dunning.
Thanks. So to the reporting, 2024 and 2023, 2025 are really key years for phase 3 of the regulations. Is there anything that we can discuss around incentivizing early reporting?
I think in a sense that early reporting isn't so much an issue right now as the reporting requirements are already out there, but to phrase it as yes, we could think about outreach, as Aiden was saying, to reach those buildings that haven't reported yet or might need, additional assistance in figuring out how to do so. We'd welcome thoughts on kind of best coordination and outreach.
And I would also add that, I think when folks can report their data is dependent on the efficiency of the reporting process itself. There are a number of areas that we're continuing to work to improve upon, one of which is requesting data from the utilities. This is pretty time-consuming, burdensome process that those that have reported to BERDO are potentially intimately familiar with. So, we're working with them to make sure that we're kind of smoothing out any inefficiencies within the reporting process itself, because we know that that is a huge factor in terms of when people can actually report their data. And of course, moving forward, they're going to have a lot more decisions to make than just reporting their data. So we want to make that process as easy as possible.
And to clarify my earlier response to it, Aiden said we're trying to create pathways and tools to make reporting easier. Building owners, just to be clear, can't report early. They have to wait till the full year is over to collect and report their data. But I think your point is, yes, how do we make sure they're well positioned to do so? And that's what we're working on.
Any other comments or questions from members of the board or the public? Okay. Hearing none, we are going to move to our final agenda item. And we're going to focus on some administrative updates. And I think, Diana, you're going to help us with that.
Yes, so some administrative updates quickly. Right now, our next tentative meeting would be planned for August 7th, but I wanted to pose a question and hear feedback from the board. I think, would it be better to move our board meetings to be the same week as the meetings or as the public hearings from the Air Pollution Control Commission? So right now we're meeting the week before and the week after, but we could potentially move the August 7th meeting to be August 14th. The APCC meeting in August is August 16th. So we could be on the same week, if that makes sense. I just wanted to hear if there was any opinions about that from the board members. If not, we can stick to our schedules and as is, and that would mean our next meeting would be August 7th.
That sounds like a good idea to me. To change it to the same weeks.
Okay. Board Member Lattimore, please.
Yes, the only concern I would have to any changes is that we kind of settled on these particular days, Mondays at 4:30, and if we're changing the date, it might throw some of our schedules into misalignment. So that's my only comment.
I would also add, if we wanted to add an agenda item, sorry, I just thought of this right now. If we wanted to add an agenda item during the comment period closes the 11th, and this would put our next meeting on the 14th. I'm just thinking about this now, actually. So
might be better to keep the 7th.
It may be better to keep the 7th this time, but obviously there are many months coming for the rest of the year, so we can shift accordingly.
So it seems like a good catch, Diana, about the deadline on the 11th, and maybe for this month, I would suggest we stay with the same dates then. In that case, the 7th and then the 21st. Does that sound right?
Yes. Yeah.
And again, I think it would be good to do kind of straw poll at some point or some kind of poll, seeing if that, oh, so that's the regular time frame anyway, the 21st. We're not moving it
Mhm.
from where it already was. Okay, I thought we were proposing to move it back. Okay.
Right, yeah, but I was asking if we wanted, we could shift the 7th to the 14th. Because it would be on the same week as
Mhm.
APCC.
Oh, just for that one or ongoing?
I guess ongoing, yeah, I guess consequently then the rest of the meetings.
Yeah. I know I have, might have some conflicts to switching the Monday. So that could be a conflict for me, or at least on one of the Mondays.
Okay.
Shifting it out. So for me, it's a little easier to keep the schedule as it is personally.
Okay.
Do other board members have scheduling considerations that we should factor into this? I think obviously the goal is we got to have our quorum, and so I think folks, we all knew that, yeah, potentially we were going to be talking about this, but yeah, any just scheduling concerns on your end that you want to bring up now, we can also do this offline, but I feel like we should try to land on the clarity around our next meeting date right now.
As long as the time of day remains the same, I'm pretty open and can be flexible.
Great.
I'm flexible.
You're flexible. Thank you, Rashida.
Yeah, I think I'd prefer to keep the our board meeting prior to the APCC meeting, just to kind of give time to discuss any topics that might come up during the APCC meeting.
So keep the date on the 7th currently that we were thinking.
Yep.
Great. I would say, Diana, it seems like we're leaning in that direction right now, to kind of keeping, at least for August, the meeting on the 7th. And then maybe as we approach the meeting toward the end of the month, assuming we have a second meeting on the 21st of August, then we can figure out what our schedule is, because I think the following meeting would fall on Labor Day potentially, right?
Correct, and I know in our last meeting, we talked about shifting that one to the 11th.
That's right.
Or, yes, the 11th.
That sounds good.
Okay, so I'll keep the meetings, tentative meetings as is. And then one other update, quickly, we've updated the review board, BERDO review board email to be BERDOreviewboard@boston.gov. So I can update that as well in all of our communications.
Okay, great. All right, if there is nothing else on administrative updates, it sounds like our next meeting will be on August 7th, Monday, same time, 4:30 p.m. And I think we get to the final part of our meeting. So I will ask, is there a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Thank you. Is there a second? Thank you.
Second.
And so we're just going to go down the list and ask how you all vote. So Board Member Boyd.
In favor.
Thank you. Board Member Jacobs.
In favor.
Councilor Lara. Okay, we'll come back. Board Member Lattimore.
Aye.
I'm in favor as well. Board Member O'Malley
Aye.
and Board Member Palmer Dunning.
In favor.
I think the in favors clearly have it. So this motion passes. The meeting is adjourned at 6:29 p.m. Thank you all. Thanks to the staff. I know you put in a lot of work for this, but thanks to the board members and members of the public for joining us. And thank you very much. We'll see you at our next one.
Be safe.
Bye, everyone.
Thank you.
Everyone.
Thank you.
Bye, everybody.